Welcome to the stage, founding editor of We the Women, Barkha Dutt.
Good morning, everyone. Come on, louder from the floor. Thank you. I flew 16 hours from a country called India to be here with all of you, and it is my absolute honor to introduce to you this morning some of the icons of the global feminist movement, women who have not just preached from behind the pulpit, but have actually led movements for change. And it is movements like the ones we're going to talk about this morning that unite us. One of the intriguing things that I've discovered about the gender conversation is that it doesn't matter whether you're from Africa, Asia, Cameroon, India, Canada, New York. It doesn't matter because there's something universal about our conversations. One is no matter where we are, we're in battle. We're in battle mode the whole time. Sometimes we're battling silently, sometimes we're battling on the streets. But to get to that point on the street, to get that movement going, there's one thing that unites all movements, and that is breaking the silence. The women you will meet this morning have all broken the silence. The movements are disparate. Some of them are historical, the anti-apartheid movement, the movement for abortion rights in Ireland, the movement to organize women into trade unions. Some of them are the movements of today, the Me Too movement, the Time's Up movement. Some of them are the movements of tomorrow. A young girl in Cameroon who talks about her grandmother using a hot stone iron on her breasts. Or I could tell you about children in India whose genitals are cut off at the age of 7. Female genital cutting is a reality. And we all have stories, some extreme, some not so extreme. And what we do with them is we bury them deep inside. And then what happens is it takes one person to break their own silence. And when they break their silence, in their articulation, we see our story. And so it's really mirror images and mirror images and mirror images. So what I want to do here with the time given to me today is actually break my own silence, tell you a little bit about myself, and then introduce the guests. My name is Barkha Dutt. I'm a journalist, I'm a television journalist, I'm a columnist with the Washington Post. I've reported on war, conflict, politics, pretty much the big stories of South Asia. But it wasn't always like this for me. I grew up as the daughter of a journalist. My mother died when I was 13 years old. But when my mother wanted to be a journalist and she walked into a newspaper office to get a job, she was told that we do not hire women in our newsrooms. And if you want a job, all you'll get to do is to cover the flower shows in Delhi. She broke her silence, she fought that, and she went on to become India's first woman war correspondent. 30 years later, when I was a journalist and I wanted to go to the front line to be a war correspondent, I had my mother's role model in my mind, and I went and asked the military for permission to go to the front line of a war that had erupted between India and Pakistan. And I was told, just like my mother had been in a different context 30 years ago, women cannot go to the front line. And I fought and fought and fought and fought and reached there. And that is what unifies movements. It's battle. But more than these external battles, the battles we really fight are the conversations we have with ourselves. I found that I was a strong, opinionated, aggressive, proud feminist. But it took me to get to my middle age to realize that I had buried things that had happened to me deep within. I had silenced parts of myself. And I decided that I could not heal and be whole and be really strong till I broke that silence. So I want to tell you here about something I've experienced, and I'm hoping that you'll join me in taking a pledge today to never be silent and break your silence in your own ways. When I was a 10-year-old child, I was sexually abused by a relative. Like many children who are survivors of child sexual abuse, I took the blame onto myself. I thought I was dirty, I was grotesque, that I had done something to invite it. It took me years before I could tell anybody about it, and it took me decades before I could understand the damage it had done to me. When I was a college student, I was sexually abused, assaulted, and hit by a partner. At that time, I third-eyed myself and I said, this doesn't happen to strong women like me. You know what? It happens to all of us. I do not know a woman who has not had to fight some battle against harassment, against abuse, against predators. And so often, those predators, those perpetrators are within the circle of trust. I stand here today before thousands of people at Women Deliver to tell my story because movements cannot be driven by silence. Movements can only be formed and born and fueled if we decide to take a pledge to break our silence. And I cannot do that without telling you my own story. And I just want a show of hands on whether we're ready to break our silences, on whether you've experienced something that you've never been able to talk about. But I hope at the end of this conversation today, as we discuss the power of movements, you'll want to tell someone. It doesn't have to be from a stage. It can be telling one friend. It can be telling a relative. It can be confronting somebody who did this to you. But break the silence. So can we have a show of hands on wanting to break the silence, having had this happen to us, and taking a pledge today to break the silence and driving the movements for equality that bind us all together? Thank you. I'm going to call on stage women who are the silence breakers, and we're all going to be silence breakers by the end of this conversation. Can I please have our fantastic panel on stage, icons of the power of movements, movements that have actually brought real change to our lives. Can we please have our panel on, and then once they're on, I'll introduce them all very quickly, one by one. Please put your hands together for the real change makers, the women leading change and helping us to break our silence. So what I'm going to do is very quickly just introduce all of them. You'll have their names up on the stage, so we won't waste too much time. This is Alva. Alva led the movement to give women in Ireland the right to abortion. An amazing movement. Zulekha Mandela, as you can guess by her last name. She carries the Mandela legacy. She's an activist in her own right, fighting demons of her own, but also carrying her grandfather's legacy, born into the anti-apartheid movement. Next, Haldis Margaret has organized women into unions. Trade unions were the first movement. My friends, never forget that. Trade unions were the first movement. And there is no freedom without economic independence and autonomy. Everything else comes later, so thank you. Tarana Burke. Here's the question. How many of you have used the hashtag MeToo on the social media network? Anyone? Anyone? This is what movements do. They interconnect us. They unite us. Cultural contexts melt away. They melt away, and this is really what unites us. Vanina Escalez, who's the founder of the Ni Una Menos movement, and a very, very powerful movement that has given voice to women. Tina Chen, you've heard of Time's Up? Their time's up now, but ours isn't, right? Big round of applause for Tina. And Nolene Nabolivo, who's a political advisor for Diva for Equality. Welcome, Nolene. And Chi Yvonne Lena saw her grandmother put a hot iron on her little cousin's breasts and decided she wouldn't let that happen to her. And what movements are really about one person, as I was saying, breaking the silence. Yes? So as you see, what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about historical movements, the movements of today, and the movements of tomorrow. And you'll find that, what unites them all is women deciding to tell our stories. And that is what I said in my opening remarks, that I really, really hope that all of us by the end of today are ready. You don't have to get on here. Just tell one person sitting next to you your story by the time you walk out of the hall today. I want to start with you, Alva. Ireland, abortion. How did you do it?
Well, we did it because young women and young men came together with incredible determination and focus and absolute passion to, at long last, gain the freedom for women that is so fundamental and basic to our lives. The right for any person who needs abortion to be able to have one. We built a huge coalition. We communicated, we talked, we planned, we strategized for years. We did not occupy the ground of the opposition. We decided to take control and to define and determine how we were going to fight for abortion and to say we need abortion. Women need abortion. It is a fact of women's lives. It is an absolute reality. So we took that terrain for ourselves. We seized the initiative and decided to take control, because for 35 years we had been reacting and saying, oh no and oh yes, and doing whatever governments and the opposition actually said. And we said, no, we are going to build, to seize this issue by the throat and to win it in 5 years, and we did it in 4.5.
How did you escape being judged? One of the reasons that women hesitate to speak, to break silence, is because we are sick of being judged.
Well, absolutely, and it was so deeply, deeply silenced. I think it's something that we all share, this profound silencing of the experiences that are central to our very beings as people, as human beings, was being stifled. So it was incredibly important for us to be able to support and encourage women to speak about their experiences, their testimonials to the distress, the pain, the suffering, the indignity, the humiliation that this denial of access to abortion had made. Really, you know, when I think about it, I think of the silence of women over generations, going way back. Women stepped forward who said, 50 years ago, I had an abortion, and this is the first time I have ever spoken about it. Women spoke about it. It was deeply, deeply moving and deeply emotional. And I have to say that women stepping forward, it took such courage. You know, we all know about courage, but every time a woman stood up and said, I have had an abortion and I have not spoken about it in public, your heart just absolutely turned over. And we knew that if our hearts were turning over, the hearts of the voters, the people, would turn over. That was where that sense of the compassion and bringing people with us. So our central message was care. We care about women, and women need care, and specifically abortion care. And we need your compassion. So we didn't feel judged, because we were saying to people, don't judge anyone.
And yet here's the data, right? 23,000 women die every year from unsafe abortions. In my country, India, 10 women die every day from unsafe abortions. In Ireland, one young woman of Indian origin dies. She dies because she's not given an abortion. And suddenly, it's not the only catalyst, but it galvanizes women and men like never before.
Well, yes, we had galvanized on many occasions before, but we had lost, and it was because we were on the wrong territory, so to speak. And this time, I have to say that the moment when Joachim Uzur said in a panel, one woman died in Ireland and it changed, thousands and hundreds and thousands of women all over the world die, and it doesn't change. He was speaking specifically about Africa, and I found that a very humbling moment, because that is so absolutely true. We don't only care about women in Ireland. We don't only care about women in Europe. We care about women absolutely everywhere, and it is incumbent on each and every single one of us to bring that care to the surface and to do whatever we can about that.
The first three movements, as we've been saying, are of historical significance: abortion, the anti-apartheid movement, and the great trade union movement. Zulekha, to sort of grow up in the shadow and the influence of the great man Mandela, talk a little bit about how that formed you, that shaped you, that scared you, that intimidated you. It isn't that easy, is it?
No, not at all. You know, I've been saying all week at the conference that I'm the youth, I'm the youth, I'm the youth. I know I'm turning 40 on my next birthday. So I hope you guys know I was very young. I was very, very young in the early days. When my grandfather was imprisoned and sentenced to life imprisonment in Robben Island. But I was, deeply impacted by, his efforts and those of my grandmothers. And what I'm reminded of is really, that the very difficult decisions that they had to make and the sacrifices that they had to make in order to ensure that, in no way or in any capacity that they were ostracizing any group, and there were so many lessons, that they imparted. And one of them for me is to, kind of like bring hope in the work that I do. And, my grandparents and their legacy has really been the driving force behind the work that I do. I established the Zweleka Mandela Foundation back in 2012, and that is really to, bring hope to communities and people who are affected by serious, social ills that are faced by our communities. Me being a two-time breast cancer survivor, me being a survivor of sexual violence, a survivor of physical violence, someone who, is surviving depression, someone who is an addict, a drug addict, a sex addict, and someone who is a recovering alcoholic, and my story is just one story. And so, I think about, the lessons that my grandparents have imparted, and I think about, what it is that they were trying to do and how it is that they were liberating not just South Africa, but, the country as a whole. To say that, it shouldn't matter who you are, where you come from or what the color of your skin is. We all need to be part and parcel of something that is going to bring about change. And, when I think about the anti-apartheid, movement, I think about how, it had humanity, lying in its core, and I think that's a very important thing. I don't know how much time I have, but I just wanted to say something quickly, is that, I was the baby that was smuggled into Robben Island by my grandmother. And, and I just wanted to say that, my grandmother, God bless her soul, who actually begged a white prison guard, begged a white prison guard to please allow my grandfather to hold me, because he had never had any human contact. He wasn't allowed to have human contact with any of his grandchildren. And, here was a man who put himself in my grandfather's position and felt like he could no longer deny my grandfather, the opportunity to be human. And so I think it's very important that we remember these lessons. I think in our own movements is that, we need to learn the lessons of the anti-apartheid movement, that there was so much power. We've been talking about power here, at the conference, and there were so many powers that were, for instance, harnessed by, that movement. The ANC, their campaign was about more than just themselves. It was more than just about people's backgrounds. They wanted people to feel included and feel, part of a much bigger cause. And so, I don't know if that answers your question, because we can go on and on and on.
Let me just ask you this. When you decided to in a way, talk to the world about your own personal battles, see, sometimes what happens to women, especially women with carrying a famous family legacy, is that you tend to undermine your own battles, right?
Yeah.
I heard you say that was only my story.
Right.
I just want to say there is no story that's only your story. There is no story that's too small to be told. There is no story that is easy to tell. So I just want to say that to you.
Thank you.
And we will talk more about what that struggle was like for you. Haldis, trade unions came before Time's Up and Me Too and any notion we had of actually organizing and mobilizing women. This was sort of the historic mobilization of women, along with women's right to vote. Talk a little bit about how much has changed, or maybe how little has changed.
teníamos. Muchas de nosotras somos periodistas, tenemos acceso a medios, tenemos acceso a redes sociales, recurrimos a todo nuestro abanico de posibilidades para amplificar ese mensaje y para sostener y hacer comprensible que los femicidios se asientan en una cadena de violencias sociales, naturalizadas, una cadena de violencias que dicen que las mujeres no tenemos igualdad y que debemos soportar ese tipo de trato desigualitario. Entonces, lo que mostramos es que el femicidio es la punta del iceberg. Debajo del femicidio hay todo un tejido de violencias, que son violencias económicas, sociales, culturales, mediáticas, simbólicas. Creo que ese mensaje fue el que se hizo evidente y empezamos, la sociedad argentina empezó a leer los femicidios en esa clave, no en el hecho particular, sino en todas las violencias previas a ese hecho. De esta forma, con todos los recursos que teníamos, convocamos a personalidades de la televisión, actores y actrices, gente de sindicatos, deportistas, a llamar, a sumarse a la convocatoria del 3 de junio de 2015. Todos respondieron, todas respondieron, y lo que pasó es que no hubo persona en la Argentina que no supiera que el 3 de junio de 2015 íbamos a salir a la calle a decir basta, a decir no nos sobran mujeres, no nos sobran lesbianas, no nos sobran travestis, no nos sobran jóvenes. Y ese basta colectivo también conmovió las bases culturales. Ni una menos tuvo impacto en cómo se maneja nuestra vida cotidiana, en identificar micromachismos, en que dentro de los sindicatos, de las organizaciones sociales, de los colegios secundarios, se desarrollan protocolos para prevenir y actuar frente a violencias por motivos de género. Entonces creo que nuestro cambio fue profundo a nivel cultural y esperamos que terminen. Al mismo tiempo, los niveles de femicidio se sostienen, no es que han bajado, muere una mujer o una travesti cada 32 horas en la Argentina, y también bajó el presupuesto público. Pero creo que en nuestro cambio cultural hay una cosa muy importante del 3 de junio de 2015. Por primera vez mucha gente salió a la calle y muchas eran niñas y niños y jóvenes y adolescentes. Entonces creemos que el futuro es promisorio, ¿no?
Thank you. It's so important that you talk about structural violence, and how that needs to change, and the structures of violence, economic violence, media violence. And that brings us to the movements of tomorrow. Movements that are driven by younger people. Even Alva was telling me earlier that in Ireland, one of the ways that this change was able to come is that young people actually were at the forefront of pushing this social change. But when we talk about media violence, one of the big tools of change driven by young people is social media. But the online space can also be an extremely violent, misogynistic space for women, for anyone with a different opinion, for anyone questioning the dominant narrative. And Nalin, I just want to bring you in there's this assumption about young people, or young people don't care, or millennials don't care. Actually, young people are driving the change everywhere, and that's how it's getting bottom up. But it isn't easy to stand out and not be part of the herd. Yeah. So if you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. First, acknowledging the indigenous people of this land on which we meet, so thank you for that opportunity. It's been a wonderful few days, I think. As a woman who's working from a Pacific Island state, from Fiji, one of the first things I think that is enabling people to be part of our movement, I really want people to get more familiar with this wonderful set of work around women defending the commons. And the reason for that is it's unapologetically, joyfully, ridiculously feminist. And if you set your principles really, really clearly at the start and the beginning and the process of your work, then people find it really clear and easy to find their way into the movement. And I think that that's where the kind of joy that we're seeing in both South and North organizing now is happening within the climate change movement. Because one of the things about this movement is it's about intergenerational equity. We're very, very deliberate about some of the language that we're using, and that's because we want to move it from this idea that all we're working on is a siloed approach to climate change. No, the same oppressors that are affecting our bodies every day, whether we're LGBTQI, whether we're women from the economic South, that includes those in the North, whether we're talking about unjust economic systems, no matter what it is that we're talking about, everyone has got to find their place within the movement. Young people are already demonstrating leadership, and the best way I think that we're seeing that happen is we've got to change everything, it takes everyone. We already have that language working within the climate change movements now. But the most important thing is that this is such an urgent moment. What we're working on is an issue that's really unlike any other, because now as humans, we have the potential to affect the entire biosphere. Young people know that, but we're starting to see an intergenerational shift so that all of us know that. And I think that's the most powerful part of the work that we're doing in feminist organizing around climate change and ecological justice, is we're saying it's about society, it's about economics, it's about ecological justice, and it's about climate, and it's about all those. There's no kumbaya politics within the climate change movement now, because we can't afford it. There's too much at risk. Thanks.
Lena, I'm going to actually request you to tell a personal story here, because so much of movements are about, as I said, you know, one of us confronting something we no longer want to be silent about, and someone else seeing their story in our story. And, you know, in your country, and in many countries, there are these traditions, so this is not about any one country versus the other, but your personal experience. You see your grandmother putting hot stone iron on your little cousin's breast. This is an entrenched social custom because it's a way of, in a sense, judging not just women's sexualities, but even adolescents. And it happens in different ways in different countries. In my part of the world, when a girl is bleeding, when she's having her period, she's often isolated, shunned, not allowed to touch the pickle bottle, not allowed to worship in the temple. So these things happen everywhere. The biological determinism that is sought to be inflicted on women. Can you please share your childhood memory and how you got up and decided to say enough?
All right, story time. When I was 12 years old, I always loved to visit my grandmother, where I played with my cousin all the time. One fateful Friday afternoon, as I approached my grandmother's hut, the usual joyful chatters of my cousin was absent. As I went even closer, I heard someone groaning inside that hut. So I peeped through the keyhole and saw my grandmother warming a grinding stone on the fire, the stone she normally uses to grind pepper. She was warming it on the hot flames of the fire and pressing on my cousin's chest. Her breasts were beginning to burn, so were mine. Very painful when your breasts are burning. Talk less of someone using a stone that is fire hot to press on your chest. My cousin was groaning continuously, and my grandmother, who was our number one protector, didn't stop. She kept doing it. A few minutes later, they would leave that kitchen, and no one got to talk to me about what happened. And I got to find out for myself a few months later when she called into the same kitchen and asked me to pull off my shirt. Out of fear, I said no, and the stone dropped. And that was when I found out about the power in my voice. Believe me or not, nobody ever spoke about breast ironing again. No mention in my community, no mention in the media. No, that's not the story of victory, it's a story of silence. The practice of breast ironing is a top secret between girls and mothers and grandmothers and aunties. Nobody talks about it. If you're not a victim, you don't know about it. And so I grew with that pain in my heart, wanting to break that silence. One day, more than 20 years after that day, I was Googling online stories about women, burning to tell that story. And I fell on a platform called World Pulse. I created a profile and I started sharing other stories, trying to muster courage. Like Tarana just said, it's not an ABC thing to just come online and start sharing stories, thinking that people are going to welcome you and encourage you. So there's that element of fear. But on World Pulse, there was encouragement. People were saying, when I shared whatever thing I said, there was so much love. One day I mustered the courage, and I wrote about breast ironing. Tremendous reaction from people from all over the world, even people from Cameroon. Wow, is this happening? Wow, thank you for sharing this story. And I got a call from CNN. Come to realize it, statistics from the United Nations says 1 in 4 girls in Cameroon is a victim of breast ironing, affecting 3 to 4 million girls. But no one is talking about it. When I broke the silence and got the reaction and encouragement from people from all over the world, I got even bolder. I started a campaign, a movement in Cameroon run by women leaders, going to churches, cultural women's groups, to markets, wherever women gather, to break the silence about breast ironing. And every time one woman shared her story, many other women shared their story. And before you know it, 35,000 women have disavowed breast ironing. And the movement's even continuing. More and more women are getting to bold to talk about breast ironing in public and to say no. The BBC has covered breast ironing. National Geographic has covered breast ironing. The Independent has covered breast ironing. In the UK now, breast ironing has been on the cover. It's now being spoken about. It was not the case before. Right now in Cameroon, women are taking over the internet to share stories and share solutions, even about the violent crisis that is going on there. It was not the case before.
I just want to ask you questions. Sorry to interrupt you. How old were you when you found the power to say no?
I was 14. Oh my goodness. I think that power was born out of fear. And from that time, I knew that there's power in the voice. Say something if you want to change something.
That's true. Thank you. Talking about power, I'm going to open this up now, and I want to ask you, Tarana, if I can start with you. When you're taking on really powerful people, right? You've spoken about R.J. Kelly. Harvey Weinstein was a big deal in Hollywood. When women are taking on really powerful people, they could be individuals who represent power, they could be entrenched customs that represent the stranglehold of power. Can the change be led by an individual? You know, how does a movement, there's a gap between one person speaking, two people speaking, and a movement that makes people feel they're not alone. In that gap, those who choose to start by breaking the silence, what do they do? Because they're really powerful people, they can, you know, there is a sense of intimidation, of consequences, of backlash, of isolation. How did you deal with that?
So I think one of the things I've learned in the last couple of years in particular, because I grew up in movement work. I started organizing at 14, and so it's what I knew. And sometimes we live in bubbles when that happens, and you don't realize how people operate outside of that. Is that I realize that people don't understand what movements are and how they function. And particularly in this day and age when we have social media and a viral hashtag then instantly becomes a movement. Me Too is a movement that exists within the context of a larger movement that is eons old, right? It could be in any one of these little categories here, because Me Too drops down in the middle of, and Time's Up, in the middle of a decades and decades old movement to end violence against women, for gender equality and the like. And so part of it is raising your voice and then finding the voices that are already out there. When you raise your voice enough, loud enough, and consistently enough, it resonates with other voices. And so it was, in my very particular instance, when I started this work, I was in the South. And I was in a community that was very powerful around other areas of social justice, but did not see sexual violence as a social justice issue. And so me talking about it was very scary because I had the people who raised me to be powerful, to use my voice, to fight back. I was raised on resistance. And so when I realized that this was going to take not just individual, like we had to deal with individual healing of the people who were affected, the young girls who were affected, but we had to also specifically speak to the community issue that caused it. And when I started talking about the community issue, it was then all of this pushback. And I said, well, what happened to the resistance? And then it took me finding, I guess, the wherewithal, and really the wherewithal came from the young people, because the choice is, do I go backwards now? Do I go back to these young people and say, I'm sorry, we can't do this work anymore because nobody will support us? The misnomer, the misconception that so many people have is that one voice alone or a small group of voices is not enough. And that's not true. There were 3 of us, and 3 adults and several young people, and we kept doing the work. The very first action that we did in Selma, Alabama, in 2006, 2007, was getting a dean out of the high school who was sexually harassing the girls in the high school. This was 11 or 12 high school and middle school girls and 4 adults who came together to do this. Once we did that, other people said, oh, I want to join in. So it's about consistency. It's about knowing that your small voice matters and it makes a difference, and you have to keep using it until other people hear you. And people will hear you right away, but if they hear you consistently, it helps build their courage. So for every time you raise your voice and you think it's falling on deaf ears, it is absolutely not. Somebody's hearing it, and it helps to build their courage until they say, hey, what are y'all doing over there? I think I want to come to a meeting, or I want to join you, and things like that. So that's why I tell people all the time, if you are in your own community, don't try to start a global movement or a national movement. People ask me all the time, how do I start a movement? You can start a movement right where you are by looking for the gaps that are all around you. And then finding other people who feel just like you do about those gaps, because it's never just one. And if it's just 2 people, you start there and you build.
But, let me be the little bit of the contrarian here and say to you, Tina, what do you do when the most powerful man in your country is a misogynist? And I mean Donald Trump.
When is he not?
But really, when it's institutionalized, you have a grab them by their pussies video for everyone to see. He still gets voted in. He talks crap every day on Twitter. How do you battle that?
Well, you gotta organize. You gotta organize. You cannot. We are at a critical juncture in my country, but I would submit not only in my country.
No,
right?
everywhere.
There are critical elections happening there's one in this country coming up. There are around the world, and we cannot sit back and be complacent. None of us can. None of us can. Your family can't. Your friends can't. Your dorm mates can't. That's how. Let's be clear. I can speak to the United States. That's how they won. What's the difference between Hillary Clinton as president and Donald J. Trump as president? 70,000 votes across 3 states. That's it. 70,000 people who decided they weren't going to show up that day on election day in my country. And the world is completely different. We cannot let that happen again next year. And so every single voice, so it's not just a voice on a movement, it's get yourself to the ballot box. Get yourself to the levers of power that are right in front of us in democracies and use them, because if we don't use them, guess what? The other side is using them. They are really good at it. White Republicans show up to vote for dog catcher. They will show up at every election, to vote every time. And it's the same with what we see in these nationalistic parties showing up elsewhere. That's what's happened to abortion rights in my country, Alva, is the right out-organized us for the last 30 years. They have out-organized us. They are now poised to get rid of our Supreme Court protection. And you can see what's happening in Alabama and Missouri, state by state by state. But we can combat it because in my home state of Illinois, we've spent the last 3 years flipping that legislature from totally anti-choice to now completely pro-choice, and we last week passed the most progressive, protective abortion rights legislation in the country. But it was organizing. It was individual organizing, bit by bit. It was like trade union organizing.
I think everyone's going to jump in. I'll start with you, Tarana, then I'll come to you.
Just a small point about the first question about what do you do when the leader of your country, I think that Donald Trump, we know he's a clown, right? He is not somebody who we respect, people with of good conscience respect as a leader, but also before Donald Trump existed, right?
Yeah.
We can't just get caught in the fact that all of a sudden now we're in this position. The leader of your church may be misogynistic. The leader of your community may be a misogynist. And it's really about not one person, but attacking the system as a whole. We have to we have to get Donald Trump out of office. It's our top priority in the United States. I don't want to be unclear about that. But
it's a fair point.
I also don't want to just leave it at the feet of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump comes out of office and your local senator, your mayor, the head of the CEO of your company, whatever, we have to attack the system of the oppressive system of misogyny and patriarchy.
Haldis, yes.
Well, I was thinking when Tarana was speaking here, and you were asking about a movement and how do you take on the people of power, and not everyone who wants to voice has the courage to do that or really know what the consequences are.
Yeah.
And that's when I think it's important that we are there for each other. And I believe that the old trade union movement can play an important role there, not taking over new movements, but working alongside and behind and supporting. When the Me Too movement exploded, we did try to do something. I represent 32 million, predominantly women around the world, and I know other global unions did the same thing. And it's about how can we support, because I'm sure there are women among our members who use the hashtag, how can we support them the minute they come home, the minute they are confronted, the minute someone tries to push them down. And we have a strong system. We can give them legal advice. We can be there for them as a collective. We can give advice. So it's about using each other. And also the education system, I won't talk about that now. But we can also do some of the boring stuff. Next week, the International Labour Conference starts in Geneva.
Yes.
And we're pushing as unions as another for a convention against violence in the workplace.
Yes.
And can you believe it that in 2019 there are governments that don't want to sign on to this, not support it. There are employers that don't want to support them. And if there are any in this room, you better rethink it. Because how can you not want to prevent violence in the workplace?
And I think you make a really important point that, movements sometimes build up slowly. And I will say to you, Tarana, that Me Too didn't catch on immediately in India, but it came about a year and a half later. And actually 20 women journalists, I'm a journalist, spoke up, and we actually got a minister to quit office. So thank you. Movements do travel globally.
Yes.
I just want to ask you a slightly complex question, Alva. And the question is this. We know that men can be feminists and women can be feminists. We also know that women are socialized by patriarchy and women can be misogynistic as well. So when you are handling something as sensitive as abortion in your country, and there are women who say to you, we don't want this, what do you do?
Well, I think, first of all, Ireland is a democracy. We respect the right of people to hold different views, but we also have the right and the obligation and the duty to say when those views are hostile to and damaging to women and to other people, that we absolutely must challenge them. But it's not, I always think in a social movement, it's, I agree very much with Tarana. You're not out there, it's about bringing people with you. It's about bringing people with you through action, not just words. It's actually also getting out there on the streets and showing, your power in that way. You're bringing people with you. What you're doing is you're encouraging, supporting, persuading. You're not lecturing, hectoring, bullying, and intimidating. And I think that was something that was very important in our campaign, that we didn't set out there to convince people whose minds, women and men, whose minds were dead set against abortion. That's the way they were. We couldn't shift that, but what we could actually address were people, decent people, with a sense of humanity, with a sense of real care about what happens to people in their lives, women and anyone who needs an abortion. And we could actually say that's what we stand for. So it was never about picking and attacking. But just one thing I do want to say, I'm incredibly thrilled, picking up on what Tina was saying, I'm incredibly thrilled to be here. I can't believe it. I'm still kind of pinching myself that it's happening. And this brilliant power in here. Think of what we could do if we all got up out there into the world this minute. But I have to tell you, there is a little part of me that longs to be in Ireland because the anti-Trump protests against his visit in Ireland are taking place now. And the protest is a huge coalition of feminist, anti-racist, LGBTIQ, trades unions, political parties. Everybody is out there. Hashtag no to Trump, Trump not welcome. And that matters. That matters in the world. No, it's not just about Trump. It is the whole system that he symbolizes, that he structures, that he gives words to, that he gives leadership to, that we have to be against, but at the same time we have to say we are bigger, we have more belief, we occupy more space. We just have to hold hands and do it together.
Tina and then Nolene.
Tina. What Albert just said, though, about the holding hands and come together, because, all right, so let's be plain here. One of the things that we have done to ourselves over the last, I've been in the women's movement my entire adult life, and I'm 63, right, so it's been a long time, is we have divided ourselves, right? You know, the women's movement is incredibly fractured. Right? We have women's health over here, economic empowerment over here, we have sexual violence over here, you know, we have, you know, education over here. And, you know, we often, I found this when I was in the White House, you know, working on the White House Council of Women and Girls, all the groups would come to us, but they wouldn't talk to each other. The international women's health groups weren't talking to the U.S. domestic women's health groups. It's sort of why we created the United States of Women to do that. It's why I love what we have here. What's the energy we've been feeling the last 4 days? It is that we're not in our little silos. Right, we see the intersectionality and how similar our issues are, how the enemies are the same, how we need to work together. And then we have a tendency, so let's be real here, we have a tendency to go back home, go back to our own organization, go back to our silo. And we have really, as a women's movement, got to overcome that. We have really got to change that dynamic and see ourselves connected in a very real and lasting way.
Could you briefly speak to how you and Tirana, for example, Time's Up and Me Too, are rooted in similar contexts? And often what happens with movements is they operate in silos. Were you able to find convergences?
Oh, yes. No, but yes.
But everybody here doesn't know about that, so talk about it.
Part of it is to respect the fact, every time I talk about Time's Up, I talk about Me Too. And I acknowledge the fact that Me Too wasn't like a new thing in 2017. It was something Tirana had started many years prior out of her own courage. And I think part of that is to respect, you know, we're not like the geniuses of designing our own stuff all the time. We are on the, you know, we have learned from others. We have to acknowledge that we followed a path trod and the brush cut down by other women ahead of us, and not be so impressed with our own success, quite frankly, right? Right? And sort of recognize and respect that. And you know, Tirana is the place that gives the voice and the fuel to the work that then Time's Up can come behind, quite frankly, on to then, all right, how do we make the sustainable change inside companies, you know, inside state legislatures and do that? And the two things have to go together, but we have to respect and acknowledge each other.
And more of us need to start doing that. Nolene?
You know, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is I work in a context in the Pacific where we have epidemic proportions of violence against women. 60 to 80% of women have experienced sexual violence. And we've just finished a 4-year report that shows that 84% of LGBTQI people experience violence, sexual violence during their lifetime. And so when you work in that kind of context and where we still have governments, for instance, in Papua New Guinea, where there's not one woman in the national legislature, then what we have to really internalize is that context really, really matters. And it doesn't matter, you know, at a kind of surface level in the air. It matters in the way we move. It matters in the way that every day we have to wake up and scrub the patriarchy off us. And we scrub it off our bodies, but we also scrub it off our schools, our children who have to live in this. I now have a 13-month, I'm starting late on this motherhood stuff, learning every day. But every hour of every day, if we're building movements, we have to internalize what is transformative and different about our possibilities. Because, so for me, when you're saying, what helps a movement to grow and to sustain itself is a resistance culture, a liberation culture, and to explicitly own that. Because, when you're waking up every day, sometimes it's hard to just get out of that shower and into the world when you know that someone is going to look at you as a lesbian as you walk out of your room and as you do your work, refusing to let your body only be about one kind of identity. That we're many, intersectionality, this beautiful, incredible set of concepts that we have from the African American movement, but that now has been used by many of us, on race, on ethnicity and class and color. We have to own everything that we've been doing as movements from the background, because it's not only about those up on this stage, it's the absolutely countless number of us who are doing this work every day, waking up every day, being like Zen, going around the rock. Whenever there's things that we can't move, we find another way. So for me, that's the thing, is just keeping on going and keeping the balance between the reality of where we are right now and the joy, the possibilities of what we can do.
So I want to bring Vanina in, but I just want to ask Lena the same question that I asked Alva, because Lena, you said no to grandmothers who were putting these hot stone irons on the breasts of little girls. And I always say that women, women who are perpetrators of misogyny are also victims of patriarchy. And I'm just wondering whether you've made an attempt to talk to those grandmothers. How have they responded to these calls for change? Your own grandmother, for example.
Those who are from Cameroon here would know about the Takumbung. Powerful set of grandmothers. When they come out on the streets, even the soldiers take off. Because it is a taboo to see their nakedness, and they threaten soldiers with their nakedness. And they are the custodians of tradition. So when I started my campaign, that's who I went to. When I succeeded to convince the Takumbung that breast ironing is a no-no, every other person had to shut up, because those are the custodians of tradition. And I strongly believe that to change the setup, to shake the foundation of gender-based violence, we need to go to the custodians of tradition and have some dialogue and reasoning, because we are living in a time when everybody knows and likes what is good. Like Kaja always says, what is it not to like about women thriving? What is it not to like about healthy breasts for the women who want to stay back at home and have babies? Let's go to that base if you want to think that women can only have babies. So it's about speaking to custodians of tradition. And it's about, sometimes there's resistance, but guess what? How do we overcome that resistance is to make women feed off of each other's energy through connecting online. When I saw Natasha here on Monday, I was asking myself, what if a girl in Jam Jam in Balinyonga or Kikaikelaki somewhere in Africa sees Natasha in Canada on this platform speaking in front of head of state? They will feed off each other's energy. There's going to be inspiration, and they're going to start questioning the norms around them. So in my opinion, when we succeed to make women to believe that the strength in their personal decision and strength in them standing up for themselves, even patriarchy is forced to bow. Because change only comes through strong resistance. That's my strong belief.
Vanina.
Agregar algo a lo que estaba escuchando. Nosotras, primero, a mí también me gustaría estar en la Argentina, porque hoy está Bolsonaro en la Argentina y hay una gran manifestación en contra, el presidente de Brasil. Nosotras en la Argentina, desde la recuperación de la democracia, tenemos un movimiento de derechos humanos muy fuerte y las mujeres organizan desde 1986 en adelante cada año encuentros nacionales de mujeres. Este año va a ser el número 34. Es una experiencia inédita. todas las mujeres, o muchas mujeres de distintos puntos de la Argentina viajan a reunirse, a estar juntas, a intercambiar experiencias, a pensar estrategias y acciones en común. De uno de esos encuentros nacionales de mujeres surgió la idea de hacer una campaña nacional por el derecho al aborto legal, seguro y gratuito. Por otra parte, nosotras desde 2015, desde Ni Una Menos, lo que pasó es que impactó en los encuentros nacionales de mujeres y la concurrencia se duplicó. Cada vez más mujeres y jóvenes, sobre todo adolescentes, van a los encuentros de mujeres y desde Ni Una Menos comenzamos a hacer, por esto que decías, de que a veces estamos separadas. Comenzamos a hacer asambleas y a tratar de que toda la diversidad de los feminismos pudiéramos confluir en espacios en común y tener al menos objetivos, si no todos, algunos objetivos en común y trabajar por ello.
So, I mean, the word may be a cliche, intersectionality, but we've got to say it over and over and over and over again, that we cannot have exclusion in any of these movements. It cannot look like it's open to some and not to all. So thank you for that, Vanina. Zuleika, I want to bring you in. You opened with sharing a little bit about your own battles, and I think the thing with women is that we're so busy being strong that we sometimes judge ourselves for just being flawed human beings, which we all are, each one of us. What made you actually tell the world about all your battles, not just surviving cancer, but your battle with addiction, which you mentioned briefly? What made you do that? Because you already had the microscope on you. You had a famous last name. You were Mandela's granddaughter, and then here you are. You're like, I'm not just going to tell the good part about myself. I'm going to tell you everything about me.
Right. Because there's still that misconception that being a Mandela makes you immune to real struggles, the things that, so many women and our children go through every day. I guess for me, I had been, sexually and physically abused for such a long time. And my issue was I didn't know that I could ask for help. And so I do believe that there is indeed such a power to, telling your story, and so with the work that I'm doing, it's just really to reach out to people. And I think that's so important, I think, with any movement is to be able to reach out to others and see how you can align, your campaign, with their fight, And so with the work that I do, even, advocating for, the adolescent health, what we're trying to do is actually come onto platforms like this, which we're so happy to do, and to see how we can join forces with, other movements that are fighting to end violence, other movements that are fighting for, sexual health and reproductive rights, is to say that, we shouldn't look at, these issues that are affecting like women or our children, as isolated issues, because then that I don't think does any justice. All it does, it separates, issues that our children or women in general are going through, and rather we should probably just look at how it is that we can join forces and in a united front in order to see what it is that women, have to deal with commonly.
You said that you didn't know you could ask for help.
Yeah.
What made you finally ask for help?
In rehab, they talk about hitting rock bottoms. And my rock bottom was my daughter being killed by a drunk driver. When my daughter was killed, I was in hospital after an attempted suicide that was brought on by a psychotic episode as a result of my cocaine use. And had it not been for that, I think, the situation would be different. And I still had my son to live for. At the time, I had my son, who's just 5 years younger than my daughter, to live for. But, I guess I had been trying to find other ways for so long in my life to kind of like deal with the demons in my life, because, I always wanted to, put this front that I was this person, and there was just so many pressures about being a Mandela. You're supposed to be the strong woman. You're supposed to be, and so I guess for me, speaking out was just, I guess, not so much about my losses, but what people stand to gain from the realization that it does not make me immune to social ills that are faced by so many, and that I'm hoping that I can, with my story, effect some kind of change.
Yeah.
Alva? Just listening to you, I just think it's incredibly brave to allow yourself to be, it's brave and it's so generous of you to show that vulnerability. And just to say a big thank you, because I mean it also occurs to me that there is a real expectation, isn't there, that if you're sort of constructed as a leader, and I'm not sure that any of us actually think of ourselves in those terms, we're people with our complicated lives, and it's as if you can't ever show a flaw, an imperfection, a mistake, a vulnerability. And yet when that vulnerability is there, it's when you're at your strongest. Yeah. So you're a really strong woman. Yeah. And honestly, isn't it just that honesty is fantastic, I think. And not to be afraid of that vulnerability, because it does actually strangely help us when we sort of assume it and live it, to be the strong women that we all fundamentally are, I think.
I want to spend the last few minutes asking each of you what has been the most difficult moment in your movement personally and how you've overcome it. And I'll just start from you, Lena. What has been the most, I'll just start left to right. What has been personally that rock bottom moment for you? Maybe that moment when you said, I can't do this, and how did you get over it?
There was a day I received a call from a Cameroonian from the UK who told me I was adding the dark pain to the dark continent, Africa, by speaking about breast ironing and sharing negative stories about Africa like a journalist, not a very good thing. I felt so low. But I picked up myself and started again because I believe in the power of women speaking out for themselves, because it's not me painting Africa dark. It's me cleaning our own mess. I think the solution to Africa's problem should not come from the West. It should come from our own selves. We have the capacity, we have the intelligence, we have the solutions. We should not allow anybody to name and solve our problems for us, because we have the same capacities that people from all over the world have. If I stay quiet, a white woman is going to come to Cameroon and talk about breast ironing and try to bring a solution. That's going to be an embarrassment to me. So I strongly, strongly hold that women have to, in all parts of the world, have to clean their own homes, using their own voices, using their own technology, and using their own connectivity.
Thank you. Nolin.
I feel the pain every day, and time is short. And one of the reasons why I've put down a lot of my other work to concentrate on bringing together economic, ecological, and climate justice work is because in the Pacific and any climate frontline peoples around the world are already facing loss and damage at a time when in the UNFCCC official processes, they're trying to remove the words loss and damage from the agreement. So for me, the pain for me is about structures and systems that know how terrible neoliberal capitalism has been to all of us. We know this.
Yes.
And yet, so many of us are not willing to then take the next step and say, so what's the created alternatives? Because the movements of people and women all over the world, in the majority world, we know what we have to do. We have things like the binding treaty, the UN binding treaty on human rights and corporations that we have to put into place. We have to get off fossil fuels. In the next 5 years, what the Harvard Climate Center is saying is that if we don't do it, we ourselves as a species face extinction. When you start to speak the language of extinction, your body moves in a way it didn't before. And I really hope that it leads to a rise in all of us doing this work. As no matter where we are or what we're working on, climate and ecological justice has to be at the center of our work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tina.
I'm sitting here thinking about that, Barker, since you asked. I've been at this a long time, so I've seen a lot of things come and go. Elections won and lost. You know, the Equal Rights Amendment was the first thing I worked on 40 years ago in Illinois. We lost, except that we just ratified it 40 years later. So you have to, pick up. I have to say, not to end sort of on a downer, I am the most afraid right now that I have been in my entire adult life. I mean, I want to convey a sense of urgency today. This, you don't often know that you're living in a historical change moment. We know we are in one now.
Yes.
And there are two pathways that this can go, and one is really dark. And so this is the moment. If you ask where's the lowest, I have to say, for coming out of the Obama administration, I'm still here, right at the lowest moment, because we are really at a crossroads. And we have got to all redouble our efforts, the whole, put everything else aside. This is the moment of your life. You will look back when you have grandchildren, and they will ask you, where were you right now at this moment, 19 and 20, 2019, 2020, going into that, when the world changed
where were
in
you?
one way or the other. This is it. This is the moment.
Thank you for driving that home. Vanina, I've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask everybody to be brief. Vanina,
Voy a decir rápido. En 2016, cuando volvíamos del Encuentro Nacional de Mujeres que se realizó en Rosario, que por primera vez las grandes manifestaciones de mujeres comenzaron a ser reprimidas en la Argentina, nos enteramos, llegando a Buenos Aires, de un asesinato brutal, un femicidio brutal en la ciudad de Mar del Plata. El femicidio, una de las características que tiene, es que es una pedagogía de la crueldad. Son mensajes para nosotras, para que no usemos nuestra libertad, para que no tengamos vidas libres, dignas, para que no elijamos cómo vivir y para recortarnos la palabra no a lo que no elegimos. Entonces fue devastador, fue una noche realmente dolorosa y movilizante, y lo que decidimos fue hacer, en 6 días organizamos el primer paro nacional de mujeres, National Strike, en Argentina. Y fue, ese día llovía, salimos todas con paraguas, fue un día muy movilizante y con muchísima gente en la calle a pesar de la lluvia.
Thank you. Tirana.
I've had a lot of lows in this work in over 25 years. It's always been self-funded. I went without a job for 18 months and decided not to do it. But in 2017, when Me Too went viral, in the very beginning, I was largely not a part of the conversation. And there was a moment very clearly when I said to some friends, I think I'm gonna let these people have it. Nobody is gonna believe that this 44-year-old black woman from the Bronx created this work. And I was going to just let them, I said, it's not about the name, it's about the work. And because I kept hearing people saying the catchphrase, Me Too, and it was driving me crazy, as if Me Too was just about these 2 words. And I was watching an interview on television with some folks, more famous than I was, and I realized that, and this was not to disparage them in any way, but what I realized from listening to that interview was, it's not just about celebrity, but it's about vision.
Yes.
And I realized that I had vision for a way forward, and that vision mattered. And whether people listened to it or not, I still had to hold tight to the fact that I had vision. It's Me Too and our work is not just about inspiring and making people feel good. It's about a vision for a way forward to end sexual violence. And it's not the only vision, and I hope to inspire other people to come forward with their visions, but it's about this work. And whether I'm famous or not, have a platform or not, I realize I have to continue on the vision, on the path that I've had for all of this time to bring this vision to the world. And so that's how it went from low to high.
Thank you. I've actually run out of time, so I'm just going to ask you 10 seconds each to quickly. Please, I'm sorry. This is not in my control.
I've been planning what I was going to say. And say, my personal low was when I put myself out in the trade union movement to run as president of my union, and I lost the election by 2 votes. With the prime minister in the room and all the press there and everything. But it was also the new beginning. And that's the morale, because we were the first ever 3 women leadership of that union, and we proved all our skeptics wrong.
Fantastic.
And now we have to continue. I want to continue also seeing all the sisters around me, creating the small rooms where they can try out. Can I voice or can I not voice in this safe space? Well, how do you want me to support you and push you forward? So that's how we're moving it.
Zulekha.
Yes, I'm a mother of 5, so I'd say like the lowest for me and the most painful was, other than the fact that, you know, my daughter was killed by a drunk driver, it's the realization that on the day that my daughter passed away, 3,000 other children died. On that day, because that's how many children we're losing every day. And, you know, so much as you know, sexual violence and that sort of things, these issues are affecting our young people, but these are epidemics that are man-made and are preventable. And I think it's important to remember that in our efforts, you know, we need to all come together and ensure that, you know, we use the power of our children to change, not just, you know, the world for them, but for future generations.
I think for me it was immediately after our victory was that realization that comes that one swallow does not a summer make, and one victory never changes the world. So how was all of that energy and that power and that knowledge and expertise, how are we going to keep that momentum going? How are we going to share it with other people? And that actually, no, I couldn't stay in bed that morning, that we had to get up and keep going, because the situation is so bad now, it's so threatened, and yet we know we're so powerful that that is the very moment when we have to keep ourselves going and keep out there in unity, in solidarity, in hope, in belief that we can actually make a better world for everybody. And that is really, for me, what freedom is all about. Thank you.
I just want to say in the end, we've been talking about the power of movements. To me, there is a movement right here in this room. So feel it, celebrate it, and embrace it. Thank you very much to our panel. A big round of applause to these fantastic women. Feel free to jump to your feet. We can have a standing ovation for them.
Please welcome to the stage Maria Bernarda Ordóñez Moscoso, who will be introducing the winner of the Delivering for Girls and Women Award.
One of the first feminist books that I read said women and men have never shared the world in fair conditions. Although the situation of women has improved, we still have many barriers to the full exercise of our rights. Inequality is manifested in girls who can't study and they are forced to marry. In my country, Ecuador, each year more than 3,000 girls are sexually abused and they are forced to be mothers. Like in other countries, exist women who can drive cars or be financially independent. Today, in Women Deliver Conference is filled with hundreds of young leaders with the power to change the world. It's a privilege for me to present this recognition to Lojane Adhaoud and all young advocates around the world who face barriers. Lujane Atkaoul is a young woman who was sent to jail for fighting for the right of women to drive a car in her country. From Vancouver, we send all our support because her cause is our cause, and we will not rest until women in Saudi Arabia and women worldwide has the right to decide. We will come to a stage to Friends to Lujane to accept this award on her behalf, as they are working to bring awareness to her cause and that other women and young people whose voices are unjustly silenced.
We are very excited to accept this award on behalf of Lujane Al-Hatloul as Friends of Lujane, a collective of women based here in Vancouver who knew her from our time together at the University of British Columbia. Lujane sadly cannot be here with us herself today because since May 2018, she has been imprisoned and tortured in Saudi Arabia for her incredibly brave women's rights activism that has led to the end of the drive-in ban there. This award today is a testament to the impact that Lujane's activism has had around the world, and she joins thousands of young activists globally whose leadership is changing the world despite the repression they may face as a result. In the past year, Lujane has also been named one of Time 100's most influential people and has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize among numerous other international recognitions. We are honored and excited to celebrate with her and hope that one day soon she is free herself to accept all of these deserving accolades herself. Thank you so much.
We are honored to be here today, and we would just like to recognize that in the face of this grave injustice, the silence of the Canadian government is incredibly telling. We hope that you will join us in celebrating Lujane's achievements and in condemning the atrocities that are taking place against her.
This concludes our plenary session. Ainsi s'achève cette séance plénière.